Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about Hindu nationalism. Now, I've done a number of videos about India, and my views are, I think I've made fairly clear. I think Indian, or 99% of Indians, make very bad migrants. They do not integrate. They do not want to integrate. In Australia, they think they've come here to take over, for goodness sakes. They've got this outrageous sense of entitlement and this very touchy sort of chip on shoulder defensiveness about things that don't seem to. You go, well, how could anyone be defensive and chip on shoulder over that? But they are. Now, if you look at the Indian and read Indian nationalist newspapers and look at their media stations, the Hindu nationalism is becoming more and more pronounced over time, and along with it is a sense of entitlement. The entitlement, already high, is now growing to unusual proportions, almost insane proportions, you'd think, to the point now where if Rishi Sunak, who as far as I know wasn't even Indian born, but of Indian genetics, if he isn't given the job of Prime Minister of Britain, then the entire island of Britain is a racist, fascist, Nazi hellhole because he didn't get the prime ministership. Well, hey, hold on a minute. What entitles him to the prime ministership? Why is the prime ministership exclusively his property there, or the property of an Indian? Somebody with Indian genetic heritage? Well, hey, you're a Nazi fascist if you don't give it to him. So this strange sense of entitlement. The Indians are as bad as anyone to scream and cry racism, and get pretty much every Indian wants to get out of India, other than the elite who own monopoly businesses and are rich. Every Indian wants to get out of India and go to a white Western country, even though they say that the white Western countries are all evil, fascist, Nazi, and Hitler, and all this sort of stuff. But the sense of entitlement, Hindu nationalists have got this strange view, and I can't quite grasp it, but I'll attempt to explore it in this video, where they are entitled to the prestigious positions in places like Britain and the United States and so on. Now, exactly why they're entitled is a little bit murky, but they seem to think because they're spiritually superior to all these white Western heathens, that they are therefore entitled. Now, this is very much a Brahmin sort of, and the Brahmin is the upper caste in India, the ruling caste, if you will. And they're sort of they're really meant to be the keepers of knowledge in Indian tradition, but it's sort of fused with being the high priests and the keepers of knowledge are sort of fused into one. So they have this sort of sense of spiritual superiority, not only over their fellow Indian citizens or Hindus, but over the whole world, and particularly white people or white countries. So they believe that when they go to white countries, and the women have actually they express it differently. The women sort of almost look for confrontation, but then claim victimhood, all in the same single pass. But the Hindus believe that they should be they should be the prime minister and the president. They should be the dean of the university. They should be presidents of the student union. They should be the chief executive of the big companies, and so on and so forth. They have this insane sense of entitlement, and not only the sense of entitlement, but if they don't get given these positions, because remember they're spiritually superior to the rest of us, if they don't get given these positions, then they can claim that everybody is a racist. Not them, they're not racist. Just those damn white can claim that everybody is a racist. Not them, they're not racist. Just those damn white people, everyone else. Now, it still sticks in their craw about the time that the Europeans were in India, and just a quick one. I think the Portuguese were the first to arrive, and they made a settlement around Goa, I think it was. And you still see that today. The Christian element in and around Goa. Dinesh D'Souza is a case in point in the United States. D'Souza, that comes from the time of the Portuguese being in India. The Dutch had a small settlement. The French were active there for a bit. But following the 7 Years' War in 1757 to 1763, the British came out of that rather well, and that really put them on the map as a world power, and they established really the ascendancy that they kept for 150, 160 years or so. Now, the British, the idea the British were invaders according to the Indians. Now, they switch between colonizer, invader, and oppressor. So they keep jumping the position around to whatever suits their propaganda. This is the Hindu nationals. Now, when the British arrived, I think there was 31 states within India. So India was not a nation in any sense. There was 31 states, and there was 23 official languages, as I understand it at the time, and over 1,000 regional dialects, where even people of the same language couldn't communicate with other people given the difference in dialect. There wasn't much of a written language that you would call at the time, and everything moved very slowly. And the Europeans all universally complained about this. They saw it as laziness rather than it was as much as anything that everything, the way decisions were made was through lengthy meditation, for example. I'm simplifying that a bit, but through lengthy meditation. So whereas the Europeans or the British would just get on and do something because it needed to be done, the same thing might take days if the Hindus were doing it, because they would have to go through all their meditations and things like that. Even today, you look at things in the courts, it can take 10 years longer to get a judgment out of the courts. Things just move slowly there. So if you look at it, there was about 30 warring states, and with all these languages, many of these states had almost no communication with one another because the languages were so different. Now the British arrived, and they just wanted to trade initially. The cost of administering a land mass that big and that many people wasn't something they wanted to do. So this idea that they arrived with the intention of invading and taking over is bullshit. And it's very clear from all the documentation and literature of the day that they didn't want to do that. They wanted to trade, and they made no bones about that. So they would buy spices or whatever service goods from whatever Indian region that they were dealing with. But because the warfare between these petty states was constant, and the bickering and the British couldn't get reliable supply, so they paid for the spices or whatever it was, but then it was all held up by this warfare. Or maybe some other guys had taken over the territory that the British had cut the deal with the local Maharaja and so on. So the British decided they had to take over certain areas, not so much take over, but putting someone in control that they would regard as reliable and who would not allow any disruption to the commerce that the British wanted to do. That was their primary concern. Now, as these petty states just couldn't stop fighting and would constantly come to the British and say, "Can you help us? Help State X? Can you? Because we want to use your technology to subdue State Y or State A or B or something." So there was this constant bickering, and the British were constantly having to arbitrate as much as anything because of their superior organisational and technical abilities, which were far in excess of anything that the Indians had. Now, the English had a couple of problems then, or the British had a couple of problems. So they wanted stability, which meant they had to stop the fighting and the constant petty bickering. That was very important to them. And for any areas that proved difficult or unreliable or disruptive to commerce, they would try and put in one of their own, their own stooges to run the place, or at least to make sure there wasn't any disruption to commerce. That was number one. Number two, because everybody couldn't communicate because there's so many different languages, they tried to institute English as the language of law and contracts and commerce. And that then had a knock-on effect where, if you wanted to get ahead or be part of the elite class, then you had to speak English, and the elites all learned English. Many of them went to school and university in Britain, so they learned English there. So English became the language of business and law and contracts and commerce. So that didn't mean that everybody spoke English, and even today there are many Indians that don't speak English. But pretty much every one of the Brahmins speaks English, as well as any local language that they may speak. So English became the language there. Now this has been a huge boom to India. Like if you took English away from the Indians and they only spoke their own Indian language and didn't speak English, English has been one of the biggest injections of cash and wealth into India. Without that, they'd be such a basket case that nobody would want to go. You would have piles of dead bodies in the street instead of every 100 meters or so. You would have it'd be the most diabolical basket case imaginable. English is the only thing that gives India wealth. It means that Western countries will open up businesses there, and the IT industry that India has been involved in with their really cheap labour. It's been worth gazillions of dollars to India, and if they didn't speak English, they would have got none of that. So the Hindu nationalists today are talking about, we need to be proper. If we're going to be proper nationalists, we need to stop talking English. That's fine with me, but gee whiz, forget about all your big IT contracts. If no one speaks English, your economy will be fucked unless you keep the English. And without that, the Indian economy is just not worth a pinch of shit, seriously. So now other aspects of the nationalism is the not the request, but what today is looking very much like a demand. We got a lot of young people in India that we don't want hanging around. There's the Indian government, the Indian elites just want to get rid of as many young, particularly men, get rid of as many young men as they can to the West. Now, why don't they send them to China? China's going to take them. Why don't they send them somewhere else around the world? No one's going to take them. It's only the West that's dumb enough and self-destructive enough to take shitloads of Indians. Again, Indians that are arriving that no one to integrate, think they're morally and spiritually superior to everyone in the West, and think they have a right to take over these Western countries. Well, one of the things they salivate over is that Indians will take over Britain. That the Indians will become majority in Britain and will hold all the positions of power. Teach those damn white fucking fascist Nazi devils, teach them a lesson for having come to India in the 1750s. So I don't know where Hindu nationalism is going, but every year I notice their demands of the white West become more shrill and more intense. At the moment, the Indian government effectively wants the right of any Indian to march into Britain whenever the fuck they feel like it, stay for as long as they feel like, do whatever they want. I mean, it's insane. Why would any government accept that sort of thing? I can't see any better. India might benefit, getting rid of people they want. But would Britain benefit? One iota? I don't think so. So now, when the Indians are here, even after 5 or 6 generations of being born in the West, they still don't want to integrate. They still send back to the village of their ancestors for brides and husbands and that sort of thing. So here's people that if it goes on for long enough and they migrate, remember there's 1.4 billion of them. There's more Indians in the world than the total population of white people, for fuck's sake. So if they go to all the white countries, then that they will eventually become the majority. They procreate quite vigorously, and they will only intermarry and procreate with their own genetic diaspora. And also another thing, and I mentioned in another video, that the Indian government views Indians, Indians of genetic heritage, even though they haven't lived in England haven't lived in India for 100, 150 years, they still see them as Indians. They still see our people are there, and we represent our people wherever they are in the world, even if they were born, as I say, 5, 6, 7 generations born overseas. It doesn't matter. They're our people and we represent them. And if something happens to an Indian anywhere in the world, even though that Indian has never lived in India, wasn't born in India, has never lived in India, it's still an Indian that we represent, and it's going to go to federal parliament, and that question will be. So if there's even a university student that doesn't get the student presidency in some overseas university, that will be a federal matter in the federal Indian parliament, and we're going to damn well get that ambassador from that country in and give the motherfucker a tongue lashing because he's fucking disrespecting Indians, the damn fascist white Nazi. So all these things are okay. So I don't know where this Hindu nationalism is going. I don't think it's going to be a good thing. I think there'll be a sizable minority in all white countries, Indian minority, Hindu Indian minority, and they're going to take the view, India will take the view that those are our people. They're loyal to us, not to you. We are responsible for them, and anything that happens to them will, even though they might all have been born in the white country, doesn't matter, they're Indian. Your government, your white government there, has nothing to do with them and can't tell them what to do. You have to give them all the benefits as if they're citizens, but that's as far as it goes. Benefits only. Any responsibilities they have to do to white customs, habits and laws, no. They are loyal to India and India's laws and customs and spiritual and moral standing. Now, as long as you've got that, you've got the recipes for some serious problems down the track. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.